The
Falcon
radio
1,
hissed
hold
with the
position,
frantic,
tracking multiple
terrified
bips.
breathing of trapped
Are those
men.
ours?
Ghost
They shouldn't be
Squadron
there.
had flown
Signal
completely
lost.
blind into
Satellite
a
link is
surface-to-air
degrading.
missile kill box.
Re-establishing comms now.
The base commander was already drafting casualty reports. Then the quiet tech who poured their coffee keyed the mic, and the sky broke wide open. Forward operating base Vanguard was a miserable strip of scorched concrete and blast walls, carved into the unforgiving desert bordering the Zardari mountain range. The air tasted permanently of diesel exhaust, pulverized sand, and the sharp metallic tang of JP-8 jet fuel. To the men of the 104th Fighter Squadron callsign Ghost, it was a dusty purgatory. But to Airman Sarah Jenkins, it was the perfect place to hide. Jenkins was 28, small-framed with dirt, smudged cheeks and dull blonde hair perpetually tied back in a frayed scrunchie. Officially, she was a junior communications technician. Her daily existence consisted of untangling headset wires, calibrating the encrypted UHF radios in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, and making sure the coffee pot in the briefing room never ran dry. The pilots of Ghost Squadron practically looked through her. They were fighter jocks, the tip of the spear. Captain Arthur Brick Calloway, the squadron's lead, was a barrel-chested hotshot with a jawline carved from granite and an ego to match. His wingman, Lieutenant Samuel Jester O'Connor, was a 23-year-old kid who still thought war was a video game. Then there was Major Richard Tombstone Miller, a cynical veteran who only spoke in grunts and complaints. "Hey, radio girl," Calloway barked one sweltering Tuesday morning, tossing his helmet bag onto a folding chair. "Comms on my Viper were static heavy during the last sortie. Tell the grease monkeys on the flight line to swap the antenna, will you? And get me a black coffee. This sand is making my throat bleed." "Yes, sir," Sarah murmured, her voice barely rising above the hum of the TOC's massive air conditioning units. She picked up the empty carf, her eyes locked on the floor. "I don't even know why they send us these kids," O'Connor laughed, leaning against the briefing room doorframe. "She looks like she'd blow away in a stiff breeze. Think she even knows what an F-16 is. Brick probably thinks it's a sports car." Calloway smirked. Sarah didn't look back. She walked to the break room, her face an unreadable mask. But if anyone had bothered to look closely at her hands as she poured the boiling coffee, they would have noticed the thick white scar tissue tracing its way up her right forearm, the kind of burns you only get from a cockpit fire. Under her standard-issue tan t-shirt tucked tightly against her chest rested a pair of silver dog tags wrapped in black tape to prevent them from jingling. The mission that day was supposed to be a milk run, Operation Anvil. Allied intelligence had spotted a convoy of heavily armed insurgents moving through the narrow, treacherous Serpent's Pass, a deep canyon that cut through the mountains. Ghost Squadron, flying a four-ship formation of F-16C Vipers, was tasked with dropping a few JDMs, neutralizing the convoy, and coming home in time for dinner. Inside the TOC, the atmosphere was relaxed. Colonel Bradley Harrison stood over the glowing radar scopes with a mug of coffee in his hand, casually watching the four green blips move across the digital map. Sarah sat in the back corner at the comms desk, a heavy headset over one ear, monitoring the data link feeds. "Ghost Lead, this is Vanguard Control," the JTAC operator, a nervous lieutenant named Davis, said into his mic. "You are approaching the ingress point. Weather is clear. You have green light for weapons hot." "Copy that, Vanguard." Calloway's confident voice crackled over the speakers. "Ghost Flight is dropping into the canyon, pushing it up. Let's go melt some metal, boys." From her dark corner, Sarah watched the telemetry data scrolling across her secondary monitor. Something was wrong. She stared at the radar warning receiver, RWR logs being beamed back from the jets. The canyon was supposed to be dead space, completely empty of electronic signals. But Sarah's eyes caught a faint rhythmic pulse on the spectrum analyzer. It wasn't a standard insurgent radio frequency. It was an X-band emission. Her heart did a slow, painful roll in her chest. X-band radar in a steep canyon meant only one thing: tracking radar. "Lieutenant Davis," Sarah said softly, stepping up behind the JTAC's chair. "Tell them to abort. The valley is hot." Davis waved her off without turning around. "Not now, Jenkins. They're entering the target area. I'm busy." "Sir," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a sudden chilling weight. "That's not a convoy down there. It's bait. I'm seeing passive tracking emissions on the C-band shifting to X-band." It's an SA-15 gauntlet system, and it's painting them right now. Colonel Harrison looked over annoyed. Airman, what are you babbling about? Intel says those insurgents have small arms, and maybe a few unguided RPGs. There are no mobile SAM systems in this sector. They smuggled it in, Sarah insisted, stepping forward, her eyes locked on the main screen. The 4 green blips were diving deeper into the narrow canyon. The walls were steep, trapping them. Colonel, if they drop below 10,000 feet in that gorge, they won't have the turn radius to defeat a missile off the rail. You have to call them off. Stand down, airman, Harrison barked, his face flushing with anger. Return to your station. That is an order. Sarah froze. The ingrained military discipline warred with the screaming instincts in her blood. She took a step back, her hands trembling as she watched the screen. 10 seconds later, the TOC speakers erupted in pure deafening chaos. Spike, Spike, Vanguard, I have a mud spike dirt. We've got an active SAM site locking us up. Calloway's voice tore through the command center, stripped of all its previous arrogance. The shrill, rapid beeping of his jet's threat warning system bled through the open mic. Missile launch, break right, Jester. Major Miller screamed over the net. The main radar screen in the TOC suddenly lit up with a terrifying array of red vectors. Not 1 but 3 surface-to-air missiles had just shot up from the canyon floor, tearing toward the 4 F-16s at Mark III. It was a perfect textbook ambush. The enemy had waited until Ghost Squadron was deep inside the narrowest part of the valley, boxing them in with the granite walls before turning on their radars and firing. Panic exploded inside the TOC. Lieutenant Davis froze, his hands hovering uselessly over his keyboard, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Vanguard, what is our out? Give me a vector, Calloway roared, the G-force audibly crushing his lungs as he yanked his jet into a violent, evasive turn. Ghost lead, deploy countermeasures and climb, Davis stammered. Climb, Sarah whispered, her blood running cold. If they climb above the canyon rim, they'll silhouette themselves against the sky. The radar will chew them to pieces. Ghost 2 is hit. I'm hit, Jester screamed. Lost my right horizontal stabilizer. I'm trailing smoke. I can't shake it. Another one's tracking me. Colonel Harrison shoved Davis aside, grabbing the mic. Ghost flight, this is Vanguard actual. Punch out. Eject, Jester. Negative. If we eject down here, they'll butcher us. Jester was hyperventilating, his jet shuddering violently through the telemetry feed. I've got 20 seconds to impact. They were dying. Sarah watched the geometry of the red lines converging on the green blips. The F-16s were dumping chaff and flares, but the SA-15 missiles were optically tracked backups. They were ignoring the decoys. The pilots were trapped in a bowl of rock, bleeding airspeed with every desperate turn, completely blind to where the next shot was coming from. They had 15 seconds left to live. Sarah didn't think. The camouflage she had worn for 2 years fell away in an instant. She lunged forward, grabbed Colonel Harrison by the shoulder, and physically, violently yanked the base commander away from the comms console. Hey, what the hell? Harrison shouted, stumbling backward. Sarah slammed herself into the JTAC seat. She slapped the transmit toggle, bypassing the encryption delay, hardwiring herself directly into the F-16's tactical frequency. Ghost flight, shut up and listen to me. Sarah's voice cracked like a whip through the speakers. It was no longer the soft, submissive whisper of the coffee girl. It was the icy, commanding roar of an apex predator. High above the desert, Arthur Calloway fought the violent shudder of his joystick. Who the hell is this? Vanguard, get a real controller on the horn. I've got 2 missiles tracking my 6. Ghost lead. This is Vanguard control. You are dragging them into your own flares. Roll inverted. Pull 80 degrees down and throttle back to idle. Sarah commanded, her eyes burning into the radar screening, reading the 3D space in her mind faster than the computer could render it. Idle? Are you insane? Calloway screamed. If I drop speed, I'm dead. Sarah keyed the mic, her voice dripping with absolute terrifying authority. Captain Calloway, this is Valkyrie. You will cut your throttle. You will pull 0G, and you will do it right now. Silence. Total shocking silence over the comms, save for the wailing missile alarms. In his cockpit, Calloway's eyes went wide behind his dark visor. The blood drained from his face. Valkyrie. Every fighter pilot in the United States Air Force knew that call sign. 5 years ago, during a catastrophic night raid over hostile territory, a lone F-16 had stayed behind to cover a downed rescue chopper. That pilot had intentionally drawn the fire of 6 different SAM batteries, dodging missiles in the dark for 45 minutes, using nothing but raw intuition and suicidal maneuvers. That pilot had saved 30 men. That pilot was a ghost, an urban legend who had supposedly been grounded permanently due to severe injuries. Valkyrie. Calloway breathed, his hands acting on pure instinct before his brain could catch up. He snapped his F-16 inverted, shoved the throttle to idle, and pushed the nose down. Ghost 3, Tombstone. Sarah fired off, not missing a beat. The radar is in the southern ridge, elevation 4,000. You have a missile off your left wing. Do a split S, dump a wall of chaff, and notch him right. Put the radar exactly at your 3 o'clock. Copy, Miller grunted, ripping his jet into a brutal 9G turn. On the screen in the TOC, Sarah watched the geometry shift. By cutting his throttle and diving, Calloway dropped his heat signature just enough for his previously deployed flares to become the hotter target. The red line of the missile snapped away from his green blip, detonating harmlessly against the canyon wall. Calloway, you're clear. Firewall the throttle. Climb to Angels 15, Sarah ordered. Valky Jester is crippled, Calloway yelled, pulling his jet up. He's losing altitude, and they just launched 2 more off the rails. Sarah's eyes darted to Jester's telemetry, engine pressure dropping, hydraulics bleeding out. He couldn't turn. He was a sitting duck. Jester, listen to me, Sarah said, her voice suddenly softening, acting as a lifeline in the dark. You can't outturn them. You have to outthink them. I need you to fly straight at the mountain. What? Bocanor was sobbing now, fighting the stick. I'll crash. You won't crash, Jester. You're going to use the mountain's shadow to break the radar lock. Keep the nose level. Wait for my mark. Colonel Harrison, who had recovered from being shoved, stood frozen behind Sarah. The entire TOC was dead silent, staring at the back of the small blonde woman who was orchestrating a symphony of survival in the sky. Missiles at 3M, 2M, Jester cried out. Hold. Sarah stared at the radar, visualizing the canyon wall approaching Jester's jet at 500 miles per hour. Pull up, Jester. Pull hard. Jester yanked the stick back. The crippled F-16 screamed upward, scraping its belly just feet from the jagged granite peak. The 2 SA-15 missiles, lacking the jet's proximity awareness, couldn't adjust in time. They slammed directly into the mountain face, exploding in a massive fireball of dirt and rock. I'm clear, Jester gasped, flying straight up into the blue sky, away from the kill box. Cheers erupted in the TOC. Technicians leapt from their seats. Colonel Harrison let out a breath he looked like he'd been holding for a decade. But Sarah didn't celebrate. She stared at the screen, her jaw tight. The green blips were safe out of the canyon, but the threat wasn't over. Valkyrie, this is Ghost-led. Calloway's voice came over the radio, laced with a reverence he had never shown to anyone. We're out of the envelope, but Jester's engine is flaming out. He's not going to make it back to Vanguard. He has to eject over the hostile zone. Sarah pulled up the satellite feed. Below Jester's altitude, dozens of dust plumes were already kicking up on the desert floor. Technicals, pickup trucks mounted with heavy machine guns. The insurgents had seen the dogfight. They were racing toward Jester's projected landing zone. Vanguard, we're bingo fuel and out of air-to-ground ordnance, Calloway reported, his voice tight with desperation. We can't cover him. If Jester punches out, those trucks will reach him in 10 minutes. They'll take him alive. Sarah slowly pulled the headset off her ears. She turned around to face Colonel Harrison. The base commander was staring at her, finally seeing the predator hiding beneath the mousy exterior. Connell, Sarah said, her voice cold as ice. There's a spare F-16 sitting on the tarmac, tail number 402. It's grounded, Harrison said instinctively. Avionics glitch in the fire control radar. There is no glitch. The maintenance crew misaligned the inertial nav during the last sweep. It takes 90 seconds to hard reset. It's fully fueled, and it's loaded with 6 CBU-87 cluster bombs. Harrison swallowed hard. You haven't flown in 3 years, Jenkins. You don't have flight clearance. Sarah reached under her shirt, gripped the black taped dog tags, and pulled them out. The silver flashed under the fluorescent lights. If that kid hits the sand, he's a dead man, and I am not writing another letter to another mother." Sarah didn't ask for permission. She simply stated a fact. She stepped past the commander, moving toward the TOC doors. "Get me a helmet." The flight line at FOB Vanguard was a blistering inferno of midday sun and baking concrete. Master Sergeant Jack Dawson, the chief mechanic for the 104th, was elbow deep in the landing gear of a grounded A-10 Warthog when the base sirens began to wail. Before he could wipe the grease from his forehead, a heavy utility jeep tore across the tarmac, screeching to a halt, inches from F-16 tail number 402. Dawson's jaw dropped. Out of the driver's seat sprang the quiet blonde girl from the TOC, dragging a high-altitude GITS issue HGU-55 PP flight helmet. "Jenkins, what in the hell are you doing on the active line?" Dawson roared, stepping forward. "That Viper is grounded." Sarah didn't look at him. She threw the GIT onto the blazing concrete, stepping into it with practiced mechanical precision. Zip, snap, cinch. "I need the auxiliary power unit online, Master Sergeant, and I need the chocks pulled now. Are you out of your mind? You're a comm. I'll have the MPs drag you to the brig." Sarah finally turned. She locked eyes with the burly mechanic. The submissive, invisible demeanor was entirely gone. In her eyes, Dawson saw the cold, unyielding stare of a killer who had danced with the devil and lived to tell the tale. "Dawson, Jester is punching out over Sector Charlie. There are hostile technicals 3 miles from his drop zone. I am the only pilot on this base with a fueled jet who can get there before they skin him alive." She strapped the helmet to her head, leaving the visor up. "I am hard resetting the inertial navigation. You have 30 seconds to pull those chocks before I throttle up and blow them through the blast wall." "Your call." Dawson hesitated, looking from her to the blinking red light on the TOC tower. He didn't know how, and he didn't know why, but he recognized command presence when it slapped him in the face. "You'll kill yourself," he muttered, but he turned and gave the hand signal to his crew. "Pull the chocks, spin the APU." Sarah scrambled up the boarding ladder. The moment she dropped into the ACS-2 ejection seat, the smell of aviation fuel, stale sweat, and electrified oxygen hit her lungs. It was a scent that had haunted her nightmares for 3 years. Her right arm, covered in the thick, angry burn scars of her past, throbbed in phantom agony. She pushed the pain down, burying it under a mountain of adrenaline. Her hands flew across the multifunction displays, bypassing the standard 15-minute startup checklist in under 40 seconds. The Pratt & Whitney F-100 engine roared to life, a low, vibrating growl that shook the airframe. The canopy lowered, locking with a definitive hiss that sealed her off from the world. She was Valkyrie once again. "Vanguard Tower, this is Valkyrie 11 taxiing runway 29er for immediate unrestricted climb." Sarah transmitted, her thumb resting naturally on the stick. Colonel Harrison's voice crackled in her ear. "Godspeed, Valkyrie. Pedro 66 is wheels up for the rescue, but they are 20 minutes out. You have to hold the line." Sarah didn't bother waiting for clearance. She pushed the throttle past military power and straight into full afterburner. The F-16 surged forward like a chained beast finally set free. The G-forces slammed her back into the seat as the jet devoured the runway, tearing into the desert sky at a near vertical 60 degrees climb. 50 miles away, Lieutenant Samuel Jester Uckenor was having the worst day of his life. His parachute had deposited him roughly into a dry riverbed, dragging him through a patch of sharp, unforgiving scree before he could punch the quick release. He scrambled to his feet, gasping for air, his ribs bruised and his ankle violently twisted. Above him, the smoking wreckage of his crippled Viper was scattered across a jagged ridge, but the silence of the desert didn't last. A low rumbling vibration echoed through the valley. Jester drew his standard-issue Beretta M9 pistol, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the polymer frame. Cresting the dunes to his east were 4 Toyota Hilux Technicals. They were kicking up massive rooster tails of sand moving in a coordinated tactical wedge. Mounted in the beds were heavy 12.7 mm Dishk machine guns, their barrels aimed squarely at his position. "Vanguard, this is Jester," he whispered into his survival radio, backing up against a large boulder. "Hostiles are closing. Range is 500 m. I am about to be overrun. Tell my mother I love her." "Hold your ground, Jester," a female voice replied. It was the comms girl, but the voice was entirely different. It was a voice that commanded the sky itself. "Keep your head down." The lead technical was 100 yards away. Jester could see the faces of the insurgents, shouting and waving their AK-47s in triumph. They knew he was cornered. A burst of heavy machine gun fire chewed into the dirt just 3 feet from his boots, spraying him with hot gravel. Jester squeezed his eyes shut, raising his pistol, preparing for the end. A sonic boom shattered the earth. The shockwave knocked Jester flat on his back. A sleek gray shape, traveling at Mach 1.2, materialized out of the blinding sun. It was an F-16, flying so impossibly low that its jet wash created a localized sandstorm. Before the insurgents could even process the sudden violence in the sky, Sarah depressed the weapons release button. "Cluster munitions away." Sarah breathed, pulling the stick hard, right, and hauling her jet out of the dive. 2 CBU-87 canisters dropped from her wing pylons. At precisely 300 feet above the desert floor, they snapped open, dispensing hundreds of bomblets in a wide, lethal pattern directly over the advancing convoy. The desert erupted. A rolling wave of fire and shrapnel vaporized the lead 2 trucks instantly. The blast wave flipped the third vehicle end over end, turning it into a mangled fireball of twisted metal. Only the fourth truck managed to swerve out of the kill zone, skidding to a halt behind a rocky outcropping. "Scratch 3 targets," Sarah reported, looping her jet around for another pass. "Jester, what's your status?" Jester coughed, wiping the dust from his visor. "I'm alive. Jesus Christ, Valkyrie, I'm alive." "Don't get comfortable," Sarah snapped, her eyes scanning the ground. "You still have dismounted infantry moving on your position from the surviving truck, and I have, damn it." Sarah's radar warning receiver screamed to life. A high-pitched staccato tone filled her helmet. Deedle, deedle, deedle. It wasn't a surface-to-air missile. It was anti-aircraft artillery, a AAA. The insurgents had a Zizou 23-2 twin-barreled autocannon hidden on a ridge overlooking the riverbed, and they were tracking her. Thick, glowing tracer rounds the size of soda cans ripped through the airspace just inches from her canopy. "Valkyrie, you are taking heavy fire from your 4 o'clock. Colonel Harrison warned from the TOC, "Abort the gun run, get to altitude." "Negative, Vanguard," Sarah gritted her teeth. "If I pull up, they'll turn that autocannon on Jester and turn him into a fine mist. I have to draw their fire." This was exactly what had happened 3 years ago. This was the exact scenario that had ended her career, roasted her flesh, and earned her the scars she hid under her uniform. The panic threatened to rise in her throat, a dark, suffocating wave of PTSD. She could feel the ghost flames licking at her forearms. She forced it down. She wasn't the victim today, she was the weapon. Sarah rolled the F-16 completely inverted, dropping her altitude to a suicidal 200 feet. She pushed the throttle, screaming across the desert floor at 600 knots. The AAA gunners tracked her, filling the sky with a wall of lead. "Come on, look at me. Keep looking at me," she whispered, violently jinking left, then right. The G-forces were immense, 7 Gs, 8 Gs. The pressure crushed her chest, forcing the air from her lungs. Her scarred right arm screamed in agony as she wrestled the flight stick. The sheer physical exertion tearing at the healed tissue. Her vision began to tunnel, the onset of G-lock, G-force-induced loss of consciousness. She squeezed her leg muscles, forcing the blood back into her brain. Doing the anti-G straining maneuver she hadn't practiced in years. "Hick, breathe, hick, breathe. Valkyrie Pedro 66 is on station." A new voice cracked over the radio. A heavily armed Pavehawk helicopter swooped over the mountains, its side-mounted miniguns spinning up. "Clear to engage the ridge, Pedro." Sarah gasped out, pulling her jet straight up into the vertical. Just as a line of tracer fire grazed her left wing tip, tearing a hole through the aluminum, the Pavehawk didn't hesitate. A solid beam of red light poured from the chopper's miniguns, sweeping across the rocky ridge. The Zazu 232 was silenced instantly under a hail of 4,000 rounds per minute. Below, 2 PAR rescue jumpers, PJs, fast-roped from the hovering chopper directly into the riverbed. They grabbed Jester, hoisting the bruised and battered pilot into the safety of the cabin. "Valkyrie, we have the package," Pedro 66 reported. "Jester is secure. We are RTB." Sarah let out a long, shuddering breath. Her hand trembled violently on the throttle. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. Copy Pedro. Valkyrie is bingo fuel. Returning to Vanguard, the flight back to the base was silent. No one spoke on the tactical net. The entire squadron, from the command staff down to the grease monkeys, had listened to the radio chatter. When Sarah's scarred, battle-damaged F-16 touched down on the runway, the base was eerily quiet. She taxied to the ramp, cut the engine, and let the canopy rise. The heat of the desert rolled over her. She unbuckled her harness, her right arm shaking so badly she could barely unhook her oxygen mask. Slowly, carefully, she climbed down the ladder. Waiting for her on the tarmac was not the military police. It was the entirety of Ghost Squadron. Captain Arthur Calloway stood at the front of the formation. His flight suit was soaked with sweat, his face pale from his own near-death experience in the canyon. Behind him stood Major Miller, and behind them dozens of mechanics, technicians, and pilots. Calloway stepped forward. He looked at the quiet girl who had poured his coffee just 4 hours ago. He looked at the heavy burned scars extending past the rolled-up sleeves of her flight suit. He swallowed hard, his ego completely and utterly shattered. Slowly, deliberately, Captain Calloway brought his right hand up to a crisp, perfect salute. Behind him, Major Miller did the same. Then, Master Sergeant Dawson. One by one, every man and woman on the flight line snapped to attention, holding their salutes in absolute pin-drop silence. It was the highest form of respect a pilot could earn, a silent acknowledgement of undeniable greatness. Sarah Jenkins didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply adjusted the frayed scrunchie holding back her blonde hair, returned the salute with a tired, precise motion, and walked back toward the TOC. There were radios that needed calibrating. Did this incredible story of bravery, hidden identity, and absolute aerial dominance keep you on the edge of your seat? The legend of Valkyrie proves that true heroes rarely announce themselves. They simply show up when the world needs them most. If you loved this dramatic military tale, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel for more gripping, real-life inspired combat stories, and share this video with anyone who loves aviation and unbreakable human spirit. Stay safe and keep flying.